I finally watched Wish, and I am glad I hated it. But today I wanted to talk about why we hated it. I walked away with more frustration, annoyance, and disappointment than I honestly expected, but every other YouTuber has talked about themselves. I want to talk about us. The internet is obsessed with this movie. I found a playlist full of 150 videos of fan content with hundreds of thousands of views, rewrites, original songs, rewritten songs, redesigns of the characters, animatics, original voiceover, and retelling projects. Not because this movie was loved, but because this movie was hated. But why do I think that this is a good thing? I think it represents something greater, but what? Good day, everyone. It is Calxiyn here to nerd out on Calxiyn Cares Too Much about something that apparently we all care about, to find out why we care so much about Disney's Wish. We are currently living in a let people enjoy things era, but the big twist here is that all the hate that we're seeing is actually evidence of enjoying something. Let me explain. Did I go into this movie just to hate it? Of course not. But as a professional musical theater performer and songwriter who, by the way, predicted that the movie would be a disaster based on one snippet we got of one song months before it was actually released, I had a feeling I wouldn't have a good time, but I didn't want to be right about it. But you may be surprised to hear me say that what's even more offensive is that this movie isn't even so bad it was entertaining or this horrendous, irredeemable mess. You can have fun with a so bad it's entertaining movie, but what was painful about this movie was seeing small glimmers of things that were compelling or made me emotional and immediately watch as they were crushed. That's the common thread I see in every review, every rewrite, every fan project. Yes, sometimes people are making fun of bad lyrics, but they aren't making these things to make fun of the whole movie. They are making these things because they were disappointed, because they saw something and thought this movie deserved better. This story has good ideas, it has redeeming qualities, it has emotional moments, but you sit there and see the potential and then watch helplessly as that potential in that same scene is squandered right in front of you, and that is so much worse. Whether you guys want it or not, I will eventually make a video about my personal feelings, but here are some examples. I see potential in people forgetting their wishes. I see potential in the man-made alchemy wish granting versus the natural occurrence of wish granting, the natural occurrence of a star. I see potential in Asha having magic and being the fairy godmother, and I did feel very emotional seeing Asha with her grandfather. I lost my grandfather very recently, and so that's the one part of this movie that actually made me feel something. But a lot of people immediately became enthralled with Asha and the human starboy romance or the villain couple concept. It's one thing to watch a movie that has no redeeming qualities whatsoever, and you just laugh at how horrible it is. But what's more upsetting as a creative person is finding something that makes you feel something that I thought would lead to unique lore or a compelling theme or emotional catharsis, and allow me to be vulgar, but every single time I was blue-balled. We were blue-balled. We were robbed. Let people enjoy things is a sentiment that makes sense if, for example, you post about how much you love something and then some asshole that you don't even know comes out of the woodwork to explicitly take a massive shit on it. But I've been a YouTuber for 10 years now, and I can't stress enough how much it baffles me that people will see my title, my thumbnail, understand that there is going to be criticism based off of those things, click on my video, presumably not at gunpoint, of their own free will, come into my space, and then demand I do not express my analysis, my review, or my criticism for the sake of their own comfort. It's not enough for them to remain ignorant of the flaws of the thing that they like. They demand that you shut up so no one else has to hear about it either. And I think it's because they don't want their peers to think less of them for liking a bad thing. They don't want to think critically, so they don't want anyone else to think critically either, or else they'll be the one left out of their friend group or their little circle. And to that I'll say, people do not think less of you because you like something that is flawed. What they will think less of you for is putting your fingers in your ears and being adamant in your refusal to even have a passing thought about your feelings about the thing. All my life I've been hearing, it's just a kid's movie, it's not that deep, let people enjoy things. I've heard it all before, but why do I mention this now? Because this is generally not happening with Wish, and that's vital. That's necessary. If you say, let people enjoy things to people making Wish content, I think that they would tell you that the passion that they have on display is because they actually loved something from Wish. The people that make this type of fan content loved something about the movie. They saw potential in a concept, a character, in certain lore, in certain relationships, and through love, they wanted to make that thing that they connected with shine. They cared about something. It made them feel creative. It made them want to tell the story that they feel went untold. We are giving ourselves the closure. We are giving ourselves the emotional catharsis that we were robbed of. As I said, the reason why I feel the way I do is because there were things in the movie I thought would actually be interesting. Like, for example, the idea that people are forgetting their wishes once they give them away. But what frustrates me is that the movie didn't make a strong choice about what should have been an interesting concept. It would have been more impactful, for example, if no one knew this and Asha found out this horrible, terrible secret, or it would have been more impactful if everyone knew and there was explicit Lord Farquaad-esque propaganda posters everywhere. At one point, someone in the crowd yells, "Forget without regret," and that's an interesting idea that sounds like a propaganda slogan. But it's an interesting idea in a movie that is full of weak executions. I'll talk about this more later, but this movie is afraid to go to a narrative extreme when it comes to stakes. Instead of going, no one knows about this, or everyone knows about this, and exploring the extreme of that idea, instead it's just common knowledge that no one has an opinion on. I think it would have been really interesting if they talked about brainwashing and dictatorships and complacency, and if that was the point. But everything is just indifferent. It's just middle of the road, and indifference doesn't make a good story. And so when it comes to our feelings about this story, I think just like how fiction needs to have extremes, love and hate is a counter to indifference. They're the opposite ends of the same extreme of caring about something. To me, a form of indifference is let people enjoy things. Every company wants you to be mindless about the things that you consume, because if everyone consumes mindlessly, everything will be a hit. Nothing will flop. Everything will always have mass appeal. If everyone always said it's not that deep, they would never lose money. They would never have a flop. And that means if they have nothing to lose, they also have nothing to gain in terms of putting actual effort into something. If people will just mindlessly consume it anyway. I mentioned earlier that by and large, Wish isn't really getting that let people enjoy things slogan that we see in other fandoms and other media. But what is happening recently is since the movie came out on Disney Plus, there's been this weird, like, I don't know, revisionist history of, I just watched the movie, Wish wasn't that bad. People are just mean, especially on TikTok and Twitter. But does anyone think it's kind of ridiculous that this sentiment started happening after the movie became free, when people didn't have to pay for it anymore? Like, isn't that so backwards? Do they not realize how ridiculous that sounds? The people who paid for this product are being harsh and unhappy and joyless. But I, who didn't think the movie was worth going to the theater for, who didn't think the movie was worth buying a ticket for everybody in my family, thought it was fine. I, who had absolutely nothing to lose, got to sit at home comfortably and didn't need to pay for overpriced movie theater snacks, put on this movie for my kids while I scrolled Instagram and did the dishes, and I don't see what all the fuss is about. I thought it was perfectly okay. The people who spent money are being framed as having overreacted, instead of the people who didn't spend any money considering that they are underreacting. There is a big difference between this mindless, inoffensive slop, kept my kids out of my hair and I didn't even need to pay for it, and the stakes when you are piling all 3 kids into the car and spending $73.50 Canadian on movie tickets, not even including popcorn and snacks. It's not that deep is for people who see the value of what they consume directly connected with how well it is able to distract them or their children. Not for those of us who engage with things and hope that we will be different in even a small way compared to how we were before, that we will be better off for experiencing art, as all art should hopefully make us changed in some way. A lot of us as creative people remember the thing that made us want to create in the first place, and we are still looking for those core memories of things that impact us and make us feel inspired. And we were inspired, all right, just not in the way that I would prefer to be. We were all inspired to come online and do better ourselves. I watched a video a few days ago that convinced me to watch this movie, and it wasn't even a Wish video. It was Book Talk, Brain Rot, and Why It's Okay to Be a Hater. That's the video that inspired me to make this one from the perspective of a musical theater creative. Not only do we need to express our criticism, but we also need to be able to have the tools to articulate what we like and what we don't like about something. Or else not only does capitalism win, but audiences and artists will lose. But the hate for this movie has gotten people interested in learning about songwriting, learning about music, animations, storytelling, character design. And I saw this post on the Musical Theater Writers Reddit about my video that said, Wish has some of the worst Disney songs ever, but they might have done us all a favor. And it's reminded me that there is actually a younger generation of musical theater writers who really care about the craft. If you look at the comments, it's mostly people saying, I didn't realize how technical writing musicals are. So all these people are getting an education. I am glad I hate Wish. I am glad for this outcome because it showcases that a generation of people my age are thinking critically about the things that they see and are demanding better and are trying to learn how to do better. And what it means for Disney and how they'll learn from this reaction, if they learn from this reaction, that's one thing. But there's something that's even more important. I have always been fascinated by fairy tales and folk tales, and as part of my university degree, I actually got to study that in a class all about fairy tales, folk tales, and fantasy. Here's my little textbook, and a folk tale is exactly what it sounds like, a tale of the folk. Common people passed down these stories orally, and then they were eventually transcribed by authors like the Brothers Grimm and Charles Perrault into literary fairy tales. So according to this, the upper classes became fascinated by these stories and would gather to discuss them as they would any other matter of culture and art. And the high society ladies would apparently take a look at these stories and be like, oh, they're entertaining, but they're in need of improvement. And we can presumably imagine that this opinion was taken into some consideration as the stories were retold. So often people get fixated on the original version of things, like which one was the first one. But fairy tales are already a game of broken telephone anyway. They were passed down orally. We don't have the first version of those stories anymore. All we have is even the truest version that was orally passed down and then written out. That has still gone through, who knows, hundreds of people, even though we do see differences between the more cleaned up literary versions and the ones that were transcribed from an oral account. It doesn't really matter what came first. What matters more is analyzing the versions that we do have and deciphering what it tells us about either the person that wrote it and why they wrote it that way, or the values different pockets of society had during that time and how that's reflected in the stories. The Charles Perrault version of Little Red Riding Hood has her get eaten by the wolf and die. No one comes to rescue her. It's supposed to be this lesson to high society young ladies about men, and that young girls of respectable breeding should not trust these men because men with silver tongues are just the same as wolves, and they will devour their virtue. But there are other versions of Little Red Riding Hood which we think are more peasant adjacent, if you want to call it that, where she outsmarts the wolf and saves herself. And personally, I didn't even know that that one existed because we're so used to the huntsman coming in and rescuing Little Red. Some versions have explicit sex. Some versions just have explicit sexual elements or innuendos, while others it's more implied or metaphorical, like the Charles Perrault one. But even in the retellings that we have now that are completely sanitized, you can't fully get rid of that subtext, of that metaphor, of the girl going into the woods, which is a liminal space in fairy tale stories. The woods is a metaphor for change and coming of age, with a red hood, which some people think is a period metaphor, and that girl comes out of the woods, not a little girl anymore, but instead a young woman who knows things now, as Into the Woods would put it. And these stories say a lot of the values of the people. The Charles Perrault version is to instill fear into high society young ladies to keep it pure, whereas the version where Little Red saves herself is to peasant girls, hey, no one's gonna save you, you have to learn how to save yourself. But no matter how much we change them, there's always that little bit of essence that the common folk were the ones that told them first. For example, Jack and the Beanstalk is about stealing from a greedy giant, which is the closest a peasant could probably get to describing their actual lords or kings or whoever without getting killed for it, and they strike down the giant and get to have riches and a feast. There are so many fairy tales about poor people using their wits or their cleverness to become royal or come into money or to win comfort, because that's what people wanted, and their wits was all they had. The opening of this book mentions different storytellers and collectors and how or why they put their own influences on the story, and it also does mention Disney, that Disney has made fairy tales part of mass culture, and so fairy tales have become part of folk culture again. For 100 years, Disney has been taking stories from the common people and making them into media franchises, and some of them are artistic, emotionally driven, beautiful, stunning franchises, but they are still franchises. While watching Wish, I could so transparently see this checklist that Disney probably had to try to make this movie have the mass market appeal that they're looking for. It talks down to the audience as if they're stupid children, foreshadowing things with the subtlety of a giant neon green arrow, like Asha being like, "I wish I could understand you, Valentino the goat," in the first 5 minutes. Don't you get it? Valentino is going to talk. The movie talked down to me the entire time and made me feel like I wasn't supposed to be here, but at the same time pandered to adults by cramming in as many references to other older Disney movies as possible. Do you get it? There's a wish about somebody being a nanny, and Magnifico says he's popping that one. Instead of having Broadway caliber musical numbers, because we wouldn't want to alienate the people that don't like musicals from a musical, it has generic pop songs and even more generic music videos to go with those pop songs in the movie. But at the same time, it has a musical theater structure. That's why I said earlier that everything is middle of the road. Nothing is fully committed to at all. Not Asha's personality, not the political messaging that is very clearly in there, not the themes, not the lore. What really struck me, like I said, was that there were all these things in the script that point to a commentary about the oppression of the masses and this kingdom being an actual dictatorship with propaganda convincing people to immigrate to the kingdom and drink the Kool-Aid, to move here because of these half-truths that they are promised to have their wishes granted. Maybe a metaphor for the failed American dream or something that got scrapped, but they probably didn't want to alienate anyone. That is the key here, is that all this middle of the road bullshit is all in an effort to not alienate any one group, any specific type of audience, but in trying to appeal to everyone, it appealed to no one. If there is anything they hammered into us at school, it's that specificity and clarity is the necessary vehicle to transfer that emotional resonance onto the audience. You make a very specific story with very specific packaging, and it's very clear what the conflicts are in the plot and all of that sort of stuff and the character traits. And then through that shell, you transfer what it means to be human. You say something about the human experience, and that's what draws the emotion out of us. And you'll notice that fairy tales are very clear, very specific. They may be in fantastical situations, again, giants and ogres and monsters and all of that stuff. But at the heart of it, at the heart of all of that specificity, is the humanness of it, is how the common people were feeling at that time. And so when I look at Wish, when I look at the rewrites and the redesigns and the original animatics and the songs, it's a reflection of what the common people want. I think the legacy of this movie is going to be about us, that we, the common folk, were empowered by the internet to orally deliver our fairy tales, just like our ancestors did, but farther and wider than they could, and we took what was presented and dared to take those lukewarm, middle-of-the-road choices, and we took them to extremes that actually mean something. That we dared to make choices that actually say something about our lives and what we want, when this movie didn't say anything at all. We are the ones making it more political, more romantic, more colorful, more cultural, more musical, more empowering, more hopeful, or maybe even the opposite, more dark. And are all these rewrites perfectly written? No, but neither were the peasants' fairy tales before the literary fairy tale writers got a hold of them. And even before the literary fairy tale writers cleaned them up, weren't they still capturing interest? Weren't they still making people feel something for us to orally retell them over and over again? Fairy tales are the people's authentic, artistic expression of the human experience, and I don't think that there's anything more human than that, no matter how quality the actual work is. All of this work is being produced by us and the raw emotions that we feel. I think that that's enough, just like it was back then. Yes, maybe they're a little bit messy, but does it matter? I question if Disney really had a reason for telling this story, because other Disney movies seem so intentional and personal in comparison to this one. For example, Beauty and the Beast was not explicitly created to be a metaphor for AIDS, but you can feel how Howard Ashman's real experiences and emotions were put into the mob song and Human Again, and even Belle, or how The Little Mermaid is like his love letter to everyone who felt outcasted or alone or different, to the point where he threatened to walk away because there were talks of cutting part of your world, and he felt so strongly about it. He felt like it was the heart of the movie, and so he fought for it. There was a time where creatives had more agency in the stories that they were telling in conjunction with the companies. Now I wonder is the company just telling them what to do? Is there more red tape around this? I don't really know. I'm not a professional, but I wonder if that's what it is. At the same time though, I don't even think that I'm being biased in favor of nostalgia, like the movies that I said. I know that they're old, but even movies like Encanto were built off 3 discoveries of how the creative teams felt about their family. They wrote down these 3 things that I'm showing you right now, and through that they captured something about our lives first. Before they made the movie, they captured these fundamental truths about the human experience and built a story around those themes and around those experiences, not the other way around. It's interesting how for Encanto, the Wikipedia page for development talks about that, talks about the themes and the story and how people felt about families and that was in development, but then for Wish it just talks about we needed a 100th anniversary movie that referenced the other movies, and so I really feel like that came first. The fact that it was the 100th anniversary, that came first, not the reason for what telling the story would be. And I think similar to what Jenny Nicholson talks about in her Star Wars video with the parks, the same is true of the films, or at least it's starting to be true. Disney has a lot of goodwill with people built up, and I think they thought that instead of selling a good movie, they could just sell the brand recognition of Disney itself. As much as I believe that these films are art, they are also a product, and instead of selling a good product that would be as timeless as their other movies, I think they were selling the moment of the 100th anniversary. But they probably should have realized that a moment in time is just a moment. After you were there, that's it. There's nothing else to hold on to, except for the fact that the 100th anniversary was there, that this was for it, and it came and went. I said earlier that there's something more important than me hoping that Disney learns a lesson from this, and it is this. Even if Disney didn't see a compelling reason to tell this story, the audience has found one. The audience felt a compelling reason to retell this story more than they did, and that's more powerful than a corporation trying to force a story to happen. There's a quote in this textbook from Disney Revisited, or Jiminy Cricket, It's Musty Down Here, that was published in 1997, and there's a bit of academic beef going on. The person that wrote this article is referencing another critic. So critic Francis Clark Sayers says on folktales, it is something that came from the masses, not something that is put over on the masses, and that was a criticism toward Disney. But the person that wrote this article, Betsy Heron, has a more generous approach and asserts that Disney does come from the masses, as well as being put over on the masses, that it's a chicken or egg situation, and I will link the whole thing if you would like to read it. But she asserts that Disney does give society what they pay for and what they want. This is me sort of paraphrasing her, but to me, she's basically talking about how the revisions that Disney made to the fairy tales, they weren't for like no reason. They were to reflect and cater to society at that time and what people were afraid of, what people were going through, how people felt. And Disney did change things about the original fairy tales, but it was to cater to the lives that we had when those movies were released. And obviously, I'm not a professional like the people in these textbooks. There are people that have dedicated literally their entire academic lives lives to studying these things, but I personally believe it is the very nature of fairy tales to be retold and reimagined and rewritten over and over and over again. I understand why people get upset, because Disney changes things, and then their changes are the public consciousness's canon about the stories, even though there are so many other versions, and those versions aren't taught. But the solution isn't to bar changing things, it's to make sure that we teach all of the different versions, because to me, retellings are fundamental to the entire concept of a fairy tale. Retelling a story to me is human. It's one of the most ancient forms of engaging with fiction. Because that article was old, it was about how Disney succeeded in reinventing, whether we like it or not. But what about when they fail, especially when they fail at being original? Wish isn't like Beauty and the Beast or The Little Mermaid or Rapunzel. Instead of being a failure at an adaptation, Wish is a wholly original failure. Well, here's what I say. After 100 years of taking and retelling the fairy tales of the common folk, is it not only right that now we, the common folk, are empowered to take Disney's original fairy tale, retell it, rewrite it, and make it ours? The reason why I made this channel was because I needed somewhere to rant about Wish, and so we wouldn't all be here if it wasn't for this movie. I wouldn't be here sharing my love of musical theater and songwriting and storytelling with all of you. So this has been Calxiyn caring way too much, and I'm actually glad that I care as much as I do. Thank you all for watching. Thank you to the YouTube members and the patrons who support me and allow me to make videos like this. You should check out all of that if you want early access, but otherwise, I do have a video about Asha's I Want song if you want to watch more Wish videos. I also go in and rewrite it if you want a video that's more about the technical aspects of songwriting, instrumentation, meter, syllable count, why the song sounds whack, rhymes, all of that fun stuff. But I do have more Wish videos planned, and so if you've already seen that one, by the time you're seeing this, there may be some mysterious third thing to click on the screen. But this has been Calxiyn. I hope that you guys enjoy, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!